In January of 2014, the family of a successful entrepreneur named Harold Saska suddenly lost all contact with the head of their household. Investigators gradually uncovered shocking details surrounding Harold's death. The circumstances of the incident turned out to be so horrific and repugnant. The questions still arise as to whether the perpetrator's punishment was severe enough. At the same time, it raises the question of whether Harold himself may have had hidden negative character traits that could have led to what happened to him. This crime is so cynical that it even became the basis for writing a book. One of the main figures in this case was 19-year-old Sarah McLean, a charming and sociable girl. Before the tragedy occurred, she lived with her employer, Harold Saska. Relatives described him as a successful businessman with a difficult personality. He was quite impulsive and always sought to dominate in relationships with anyone. Sometimes Harold could seem rather rude, but according to his loved ones, he by no means deserved the fate that befell him. These events took place in the small city of Lawrence, Kansas, USA, with a population of less than 100,000 people. On January 17, 2014, a young man who lived near the Lawrence College campus came to the local police station. It was a very safe and comfortable area to live in, with a low crime rate. Of course, conflicts sometimes occurred here, but they were usually minor altercations between students that were quickly resolved without serious consequences. When the young man arrived at the police station, the officers initially assumed that it was some insignificant incident. The guy reported that he had heard suspicious and frightening sounds coming from his upstairs neighbor's apartment. He believed that something terrible might have happened there. The law enforcement officers decided to check this information and responded to the call quite promptly. By that time, it was already around 11:00 p.m. No one answered the knocks on the door, but there were strong reasons to believe that something bad had happened inside. The police then began to survey the area. It turned out that the back door was locked. Next, the officers looked through the windows, shining flashlights into the rooms, trying to understand what had occurred inside. In one of the windows, they saw something that turned a routine check into an investigation of a serious crime. The police noticed an unconscious man lying on the floor. When they entered the apartment, they recognized him as Harold. He was lying in a pool of dried blood. Harold's throat was cut so deeply that his head was barely attached to his body. This was clearly not just a crime, but a murder committed with extreme brutality. The local police had never encountered such gruesome crimes before and were shocked by the scene they witnessed and the amount of blood in the apartment. No one could understand who could have committed such a heinous act. Investigators quickly found out that during this period, a 19-year-old student named Sarah McLean was living with Harold. However, there was no trace of the girl in the house. There was a possibility that she had become the second victim of an unknown psychopath who broke into the apartment and brutally killed the man. Sarah should have been the last person to see Harold alive. What could have happened to the girl was anyone's guess. Numerous witnesses and acquaintances claimed that for Sarah, Harold was a role model and a mentor in life. She saw the best qualities in him: understanding and a desire to help, something she lacked so much from her biological father. The girl had serious problems with her parents at home, who could barely find common ground due to the family breakdown. Sarah moved in with Harold after entering college, and despite the significant age difference, they became friends. On the morning of the same day that the businessman's body was found, Sarah's biological father went to the police and reported her missing. This happened much earlier than when the other student called the police, but the officers never arrived at the scene. Sarah's father reported that he regularly communicated with his daughter by phone, but she had not answered his calls for a day already. This was very unlike Sarah, so her father decided to report the young girl missing. Often the police do not pay attention to such reports or delay the investigation, since teenagers frequently run away from home to have fun or due to family problems and then return. But this case was clearly different because Sarah could have become the second victim of a brutal crime. Therefore, it was crucial to find the 19-year-old girl as soon as possible and act swiftly. Sarah McLean was born in 1994 in the city of Topeka, the administrative center of the state of Kansas. She was an ordinary child, cheerful, friendly, and charming. Sarah had an attractive appearance and long dark hair. From a young age, the girl was interested in many things and had a wide range of hobbies. By her parents' decision, she was homeschooled. However, not everything in Sarah's life was cloudless. The girl suffered harassment from a neighbor, which left her with a psychological trauma. Adolescence brought Sarah the typical difficulties of this period. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was a tense atmosphere in the girl's family. When Sarah was 16, her parents decided to divorce. This was followed by conflicts and disputes related to the division of joint property. During that period, Sarah became a victim of violence by a guy she knew. In addition, the neighbor continued to harass her, so the girl was afraid to be at home more than necessary. In an attempt to escape from her problems, Sarah began to drink alcohol and date various guys in search of love. But in the end, nothing helped, and she had a nervous breakdown. Sarah even tried to take her own life, which landed her in the hospital. Sarah underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic. After being discharged, she continued to take prescribed medications. Harold Saska was born in 1961. He always stood out for his extraordinary activity and worked virtually around the clock. The man dreamed of building his own business and getting rich, so he started working at the age of 14, which later yielded results. For a long time, Harold held the position of administrator in restaurants, which allowed him to master management skills and practice, accumulate funds, and gain experience to start his own business. He transformed this invaluable experience into ownership of 3 franchise pizzerias in the cities of Topeka and Lawrence. Harold had been managing the restaurant business long before he met Sarah. Despite being an entrepreneur, Harold remained quite simple in communication. He often participated in various community events and also gave out pizza for free during important church services. He was also a mentor for young people. It was through this program that Harold met Sarah, who started working at one of his restaurants in Topeka. When the girl turned 14, she was already taking orders at the counter. At that time, she was already attracting the attention of the business owner, who constantly complimented her. But Sarah ignored them. By the age of 17, Sarah began saving money to move out from her parents. Sarah realized that she would not be able to become independent and achieve her goals while remaining in the toxic atmosphere of her parents' home. During this period, her mother and father often argued about the upcoming division of property. In any case, the earnings from the restaurant were not enough for Sarah to rent a separate apartment. At this time, she grew closer to her boss and openly told Harold about her life problems. Thanks to the mentoring program, he became like a second father to her. At the same time, Sarah felt that her biological father did not love her. The girl's problems did not leave the restaurant manager indifferent, and Harold offered her to move in with him. Given that Sarah had nowhere to go, but she desperately wanted to solve her problems at home, Sarah agreed to his proposal and after some time decided to move. The only person who expressed concern about this situation was Sarah's mother. They often discussed the upcoming move with her daughter. The woman was suspicious of this idea, suspecting something wrong. But Sarah was adamant. She could no longer stay in her parents' house and endure constant quarrels. Eventually, immediately after entering college, Sarah moved in with her mentor. They both viewed it as a temporary measure and a kind of cohabitation that would not last long. Harold believed that in this way he could help the girl study in college. The man paid for her education and supported her. Several months passed, during which they grew closer and became good friends. Later, they moved together to another house in the suburbs, where the mentorship continued. Until in July of 2014, this cozy house in a quiet residential area became the scene of a brutal murder. The fact that a 19-year-old girl was living with a 52-year-old man as friends already raised many questions. This circumstance surprised the investigators. Initially, the detectives assumed that Sarah could have been the victim of an attack, just like her mentor. Her parents were worried because she did not respond to attempts to contact her. There was a possibility that Sarah had been taken hostage and faced an unenviable fate if the police could not quickly find the perpetrator.
To let her know that we love her and want her to come home.
Forensic experts were shocked by the brutality of the attack on the businessman. It appeared that the motive for the crime was personal. The victim's hands were tied behind his back, and then his throat was slit. Analysis of the blood traces found showed that they all belonged to the deceased. Probably Sarah was not injured during the attack, but then it could indicate her abduction. Other versions were also considered in parallel. During the searches, detectives noticed the disappearance of many valuable items. It resembled a robbery. Most of the items were scattered from the closets, as if the perpetrator was looking for valuables. As a result, the criminal stole money and firearms that Harold kept for self-defense. After taking inventory of the stolen items, the detectives realized that almost all of the girls' personal belongings had disappeared from the house. They were clearly gathered in a hurry. However, Sarah's car remained in place. In addition, her mobile phone and tablet were lying on the kitchen table. Given that Sarah was left without means of communication, investigators increasingly leaned towards the idea of her abduction. Otherwise, she would not have left her phone and car behind. However, the strangest find discovered by law enforcement was letters on the floor. Some word was written in Harold's blood. It was probably a message, but it was smeared, so it was impossible to read the inscription. The only lead the investigators had was the license plate number of the victim's car, which had also disappeared from the crime scene. The number was checked in the database, and the police began an active search for the vehicle. They reviewed all the footage from surveillance cameras where this vehicle could have been recorded. Soon it was spotted on a recording from a toll booth located on the way to Texas. However, the video quality was very poor. The detective saw a person behind the wheel, but it was impossible to determine who it was. Even the driver's gender remained a mystery. It was clear that the car was heading south, so the police began checking other cameras that could have captured it along this route. However, no new information could be obtained. The sheriff of the precinct contacted all the posts that the stolen car could have passed, but it was quiet everywhere. While the detectives were waiting for new information, they began interviewing the missing girls' friends and acquaintances. The investigators sought to get an idea of these people's personalities and find out the true nature of the relationship between Sarah and the 52-year-old murder victim. The police suspected that their relationship might go beyond ordinary mentorship and friendly cohabitation. However, no evidence of an intimate relationship or anything similar could be found. No one had ever noticed them behaving like a couple in love, although some people had such suspicions. Even in the house where Sarah and Harold lived, the girl had her own separate room and bedroom. It seemed that the man had indeed become a mentor and, to some extent, a father figure to his employee. This was entirely consistent with the image of a virtuous Samaritan, which was portrayed by numerous friends and acquaintances of Harold. The police even found confirmation of this in one of Sarah's social media posts, where she was pictured together with Harold. Sarah referred to him as Dad. Colleagues at work also did not notice any signs of a romantic relationship between the persons involved in the case. They described Harold as energetic and extremely purposeful. The entire business rested on him, and he also enjoyed helping those in need.
He helped everybody. He was to help everybody, and in fact, he was helping Sarah.
Anybody, he would pick you up off the street. If you needed somewhere to stay, he'd give you money. If you were hungry, he was just really kind.
However, some characterized him as a pervert who was attracted to young girls. Therefore, they assumed that the real reason for inviting Sarah to live with him was the desire to engage in an intimate relationship with her. Sarah, for her part, was described as a diligent, nice, and smart girl. She gave the impression of a somewhat shy person. She did not have many close friends. Sarah compensated for most of her communication through activity on social networks. No criminal past was found for either of the pair. Despite interviewing dozens of people, the police did not make any progress in the investigation. Sarah's whereabouts and fate remained unknown. Meanwhile, the critical 48-hour period, during which the chances of finding a crime victim alive were highest, was rapidly running out. Soon, the missing girl's relatives received a call from an unknown person from Texas. He did not say anything specific and simply hung up after a few seconds. Fortunately, the police managed to track the location from which the suspicious call was made. It was assumed that Sarah's kidnapper was the one who called. It was a gas station near the town of Bish, Texas. The call was made from a 24-hour store, so investigators were able to obtain footage from surveillance cameras as soon as they arrived at the scene. The video showed Sarah entering the store and dialing a number on her mobile phone. However, she did not say anything and ended the call a few seconds after her parents answered. Then she calmly made a purchase, paid for gas, got into the car, and drove away. This event raised new suspicions among the police. The girl closely resembled Sarah in appearance. If we assumed that she was a victim of abduction, then why did she enter the store alone, without any coercion, and behave completely at ease, as if no one was forcibly holding her? Could it be that Sarah was not a victim but a murderer who was trying to escape? A week passed, during which no news came. Sarah had literally disappeared from all radars, but late in the evening of January 25, 2014, one of the police officers on patrol in the Everglades area of Florida noticed a suspicious car parked on the side of the road while inspecting his precinct.
They say from Lawrence, she then went somewhere into Texas and eventually crossed over into Florida, where she was found Saturday at the Everglades National Park.
Stopping was prohibited in this place, so the officer decided to check the vehicle. In the back seat of the car, he found a girl sleeping, curled up. The patrol officer noticed a large number of empty water bottles in the car. It seemed that Sarah had been here for quite a long time and was actually living in the car. The policeman tapped on the window, waking the girl up. He told her that she must leave this place immediately. After that, as a precautionary measure, the patrol officer checked the car's license plate number in the database. It turned out that the car was wanted and belonged to Harold Saska. The officer ordered the girl to get out of the vehicle, detained her, and sent her to the state of Kansas. The vehicle was immediately seized and sent for examination. During a search inside the car, a large knife with stains resembling blood, a gun, and an axe were found. After conducting analyses, forensic experts concluded that it was this knife that had been used to slit the throat of the 52-year-old businessman. But what could have prompted someone to deal so brutally with a person who was their mentor and in many ways replaced a biological father? In this rather strange tandem, it was Sarah who aroused more suspicion. She came from a troubled family. Despite her good manners and politeness, Sarah had long been considered a difficult teenager. During interrogation at the police station, Sarah confessed that the reason for the tragedy was the events that occurred after she began living with Harold. According to Sarah, at first everything was wonderful. Harold took care of her like a father. The man asked Sarah to call him dad in public, and he told everyone that Sarah was his stepdaughter so that their cohabitation would not raise unnecessary questions for anyone. But later, the man began to make indecent proposals to the girl and harass her. For some time, Sarah managed to avoid these conversations, but Harold became more and more persistent and aggressive. He no longer just hinted at an intimate relationship, but openly demanded it from the girl. The man began to reproach Sarah for investing a lot in her, and now she was supposedly obliged to sleep with him. To make more of an impression, Harold made a long list of his expenses on the girl and constantly threw it in her face. The list included, in particular, 2 plastic surgeries that the man himself insisted on rhinoplasty and gluteoplasty, designed to correct Sarah's appearance according to his ideas of perfection. Harold also demanded that Sarah undergo breast augmentation surgery, humiliated her by saying that she had a mediocre appearance and no one would ever love her like that. This awakened Sarah's insecurities. Sarah became increasingly constrained and withdrawn. During that period, Harold began giving her alcohol and illegal substances, and when Sarah was high, he coerced her into sexual intimacy. Later, Sarah began to engage in intimate relations with him even without doping, only under his coercion, so as not to anger the man. Due to the constant pressure that Harold exerted on her, Sarah felt like a victim. She was afraid to even go to her parents, feared condemnation, so she continued to endure it all. And Harold continued to threaten her with a lawsuit to recover his expenses. Sometimes Sarah did not go to work because she was ashamed. She would lie on the couch all day, drink, and think about how to break out of this vicious circle. But nothing sensible came to mind. Sarah was morally crushed. She saw the only way out of this situation in killing her abuser. So she eventually went and committed the crime to free herself. On that fateful day, January 14th, 2014, Harold returned home and started working on the sound system. He asked Sarah to bring him a beer, and Sarah fulfilled the request. However, she slipped a few sleeping pills into the drink, which she had purchased a few days before the planned massacre. When Harold passed out, Sarah tied his hands to secure herself. Now she had complete control over his body. Sarah described the gruesome details of the crime she committed in an absolutely calm and extremely detailed manner. Having immobilized her victim, Sarah felt for Harold's pulse on his neck, trying to sense how the blood was flowing through his veins. It seemed to give her strength. Sarah went to the kitchen and took a large knife. Sarah plunged the blade into the victim's neck and fell into a frenzy, trying to cut off his head. She literally could not stop. At one point, the thought flashed through the girl's mind to abandon her intention to kill Harold, but she could no longer restrain herself and decided to follow through with it. The police also tried to clarify some strange circumstances found at the crime scene. In particular, they were interested in what was written in blood and why it was later erased. Sarah explained that after the murder, she wrote the word freedom in blood, which then accidentally got smeared. The suspect claimed that she had to break free. That was how she marked the purpose of this crime. Having finished dealing with Harold, Sarah washed up and changed her clothes. She confirmed that she had intentionally left her phone and tablet in the kitchen to avoid the possibility of being tracked. Instead, Sarah stole another mobile phone. It was from this phone that she called her relatives from the gas station. Before fleeing, Sarah gathered her personal belongings, everything that could come in handy on the road. The girl drove as far as she could, then stopped in a deserted place and spent several days there, sleeping in the car, eating fast food, and pondering her next steps. But eventually, Sarah began to be tormented by her conscience. She felt bad and fell into despair. At the time she was found, Sarah was in a pitiful state. During the interrogation, Sarah also admitted that she wanted to see someone die. Law enforcement officers latched onto this phrase and dismissed the version that Sarah herself was a victim of violence.
Well, simply put, we believe that the facts of this case, once they're revealed in the courtroom, will be evidence of that heinous, atrocious, and cruel offense that Kansas legislature has decided is warranted for a crime of this nature, that a higher penalty is appropriate.
Instead, they concluded that they were dealing with a psychopath obsessed with the idea of murder. On January 17, 2015, Sarah McLean was officially charged with premeditated murder. The hearings took place in the District Court of Lawrence. Numerous people came to the girl's defense, assuring that she had never shown any inclination to violence or cruelty.
Many survivors go to prison because they aren't afforded the same consideration that we see being granted in like stand your ground situations.
But the question is why and what was going on in that house. And the hearing process that we had really didn't get to that. There are lots of women at TCF in Sarah's situation.
However, the prosecution had a different opinion. A large amount of evidence was collected that literally indisputably pointed to Sarah's guilt. She was found in the victim's car, where a bloody knife with 2 types of DNA was also discovered, the blood of the murdered man on the blade, and Sarah's fingerprints on the handle. During the very first interrogation, the girl gave a confession and did not retract it until the start of the court hearings. Given the exceptional brutality of the crime, the prosecutors insisted on life imprisonment for the young defendant. It only remained to convince the jury of this. Sarah's lawyer decided to build the line of defense on the basis of her insanity. He considered such tactics to be the most advantageous, so in court, he insisted that Sarah was mentally ill and needed treatment, not punishment. The defense claimed that the accused had mental disorders, for which she was taking prescription drugs. But approximately a year before the crime, a doctor had prescribed Sarah new medications that had a devastating effect on her mental state. The girl began to have bouts of aggression, she periodically fell into a rage, and cruel thoughts haunted her. All this led to the emergence of Sarah's obsessive idea to kill someone. For a long time, Sarah struggled with this side effect of medications and her illness, hoping that the obsessive thoughts would pass. She was sure that if she did commit murder, she would no longer be able to stop. However, the I'd fix would not let her go. Sometimes it seemed to Sarah that by taking someone's life, she would feel a surge of new strength. This thought inspired the girl. Eventually, she became curious to find out what feelings she would have after killing a person. However, according to the lawyer, the murder was committed in the heat of passion, impulsively. The defendant simply could not cope with the sudden outburst of emotions that seized her. The prosecution, on the other hand, believed that despite her mental problems, Sarah had a clear plan of action for the murder and was fully aware of her actions. To support this version, the fact was presented that Sarah had made online inquiries about injuries to the neck area. She was looking for information on how to inflict knife wounds more effectively and was searching for a victim for her cruel intentions. Shortly before the murder, the businessman had fallen into depression. Harold complained about his depressed state and even made remarks about wanting to voluntarily end his life. Probably, that's why Sarah chose him as her victim. Perhaps Sarah decided to help her mentor and carry out what he had intended instead of him. Sarah knew exactly how to act, so a few hours before the crime, she took the medications prescribed to her. This was supposed to awaken anger and bloodlust in her. At the same time, she gave Harold a sleeping pill and waited for him to fall into a slumber from which he would never wake up. According to the prosecutor, the planning and preparation for the murder refuted the version of the defendant's insanity, and therefore her place was behind bars. The defense, in turn, had its own arguments. The lawyer insisted that Sarah suffered from multiple personality disorder. She was found to have at least a few alter egos that developed as a result of dissociative identity disorder. This is a mental phenomenon in which a person behaves as if they possess two or more different personalities or ego states. These subpersonalities emerged as a defense mechanism of the psyche in response to the difficult life circumstances in which Sarah found herself as a teenager. In view of this, the lawyer considered Sarah insane and insisted on the need to send her for psychiatric treatment. At the same time, the psychiatrist who worked with her while awaiting the trial said that such deviations could manifest in young people against the background of traumatic events. Sarah fell into the 7% of confirmed diagnoses that are identified during research. It was believed that the first prerequisites for the tragedy appeared back in adolescence, when she was coerced into intimacy through violence. Against this background, new personalities emerged in her. One of them was called Vanessa. Like Sarah, she was very timid and frightened. The diametrically opposite personality was Alice, very cruel and aggressive, always expecting foul play and ready to act to protect all the other alter egos. While communicating with psychiatrists in prison, Sarah made another statement. She spoke about the violence of an intimate nature committed against her by the murdered man. The man had literally arranged her life. He gave her a pretty good salary, a roof over her head, and was indeed a valuable mentor while demanding intimacy. However, Sarah felt trapped because of this. According to her, she got involved with this man to solve her life problems, but instead acquired new ones that she could not cope with. She felt that he was using her. During this period, her personalities began to conflict. Vanessa wanted to commit suicide, but Alice transformed this thought in the exact opposite way. Instead of wanting to kill herself, she wanted to bring death to others. This was what the distorted defense mechanism looked like, associated with the girl's mental deviations and repeatedly amplified by the new drug prescribed by the doctor. After that, Sarah decided to commit the crime. At this time, Alice, who was killing Harold, gained full control over her body. Having thoroughly enjoyed control over the victim, she slit his throat in the most brutal way. While the execution was taking place, all of Sarah's modest personalities faded into the background, literally becoming outside observers. It is worth noting that many more alter egos coexisted in her than the couple mentioned, but only Alice among them was cruel and truly evil. According to Sarah, her kinder personalities tried to stop Alice, but they failed to do so. In any case, the criminal's lawyer believed that she should not be put in prison. In the defense's opinion, Sarah was insane and desperately needed treatment for her illnesses. The defendant could not even be present at some of the hearings, according to the defense, due to an exacerbation of mental problems. The lawyer was outraged that Sarah had given a confession during the first interrogation. According to psychiatrists, it was unknown which alter ego was in control of the body at that moment. The accused's different personalities gave different testimonies. Only Alice claimed that Harold had harassed her. The rest denied it. In any case, the investigation managed to find evidence of violence by Harold. He wrote about this in messages to Sarah, but it was all ignored. The prosecution concluded its speech by pointing out two indisputable facts. First, Harold was dead. Second, Sarah was definitely the killer. Naturally, she tried to portray herself as a victim, but the real victim was already buried. The defense continued to insist that Sarah suffered from serious mental problems and was also subjected to sexual violence and harassment by the murdered man. After that, the jury retired to deliberate on the verdict. Sarah arrived at the sentencing in a rather adequate state. She managed to pull herself together. She burst into tears when she saw the Saska family. It seemed that she was ashamed of what had happened, so she asked them for forgiveness. The jury decided that Sarah was guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years. The jurors emphasized that it was a planned crime. In May of 2021, Sarah's case was reconsidered. Her sentence was reduced to 25 years. Sarah is still serving her sentence in the Topeka Correctional Facility in Kansas. The earliest date she can be released from prison is 2039. Rivers hide countless secrets in their depths. They conceal the chilling evidence of tragedies and crimes. This is exactly what the residents of a small town witnessed when, on one gloomy day, the waves washed ashore the body of a young teenage girl who literally had no face. Yes, you heard that right. This story took place in the small town of Waurika, located in a remote southern region of Oklahoma, USA. It's a quiet place with a population of about 2,000 people, where everyone knows each other. Life here flows smoothly and unhurriedly. In the fall of 1996, one of the homes in Waurika was occupied by the Rich family, Gail the mother, Dwayne the father, and their 4 children, 3 boys and a girl named Heather, who at the time of these events was a sophomore in high school. Heather was not only an excellent student, but also a cheerleader. She had grown into a true beauty and attracted attention wherever she went. The girl had a kind nature, but was quite adventurous when it came to having fun. At 16, Heather was in her rebellious phase and wanted to try everything in life. On the evening of October 2nd, 1996, an argument arose between Heather and her mother over a $300 phone bill the girl had racked up chatting with her friends. Gail was upset by her daughter's wastefulness, while Dwayne took the situation more calmly. The thing was, the family was going through tough financial times. Heather's father, an electrician, had recently been severely injured in a transformer explosion. The man barely survived and required prolonged treatment and skin grafts. He couldn't work, so his wife had to take on an extra job to keep the family afloat. Every dollar counted, as expensive surgeries lay ahead for the father. The mother tried to explain to Heather that she couldn't afford to pay bills amounting to hundreds of dollars every month and to instill in her daughter respect for money, for elders, and the desire for independence. However, the teenage girl had a hard time accepting these admonitions, which led to a serious quarrel. When tempers cooled, Heather decided to go to bed. She went down to the living room, where she wished her father good night. Passing by her mother, the girl demonstratively remained silent, making it clear that she was still offended. On this sad note, all the family members retired to their rooms. The next morning, October 3rd, Gail, as usual, woke the children up for breakfast. But Heather didn't come out for a long time, and her mother attributed it to teenage resentment. The woman was sure that eventually hunger would force her daughter to come downstairs, despite her rebellious mood. But the girl never showed up. When Gail lost patience and went up to Heather's room, she was surprised to find no one there. Cell phones were not so common back then, so Heather didn't have one. The worried parents called all of their daughter's girlfriends, but none of them knew where she might be. Such behavior was completely unlike Heather. She had no mental issues and had never run away from home before. Moreover, the girl always took great care of her appearance and was unlikely to go anywhere for long without a change of clothes and makeup. But all her things were left at home. Gail and Dwayne wasted no time and headed to the sheriff's office in Waurika to report their daughter missing. The mother told about yesterday's argument with Heather, during which the woman reproached the girl for the huge phone bill and the stubbornness with which she refused to admit her guilt. The parents felt that their daughter's endless chats with her friends were going beyond reason, and although Dwayne was generally calmer, he supported his wife on this matter. The sheriff tried to reassure the worried parents, assuring them that the girl had probably just run away from home, as teenagers often do, especially after a fight with their parents. But Gail and Dwayne knew this was out of character for their daughter. Heather usually didn't run from problems, but tried to find a compromise, even after conflicts. Unfortunately, this time the mother's fiery reaction and the girl's lack of restraint, who couldn't admit her mistake, led to an unfortunate situation. Despite the parents' concerns, law enforcement officials assured them that most such situations resolve themselves. Teenagers who have run away from home usually come to their senses quickly and return to their families. It was quite possible that while Gail and Dwayne were at the sheriff's office, their daughter was already back home. The officers tried to reassure the worried mother and father, assuring them that everything would be fine. They explained that for a girl to be declared missing, at least a day must pass without any contact. Since the specified time had not yet elapsed, the police could not accept the statement and sent the couple home to wait for news from Heather. Disappointed by the attitude of law enforcement, Gail and Dwayne felt that something had happened to their daughter and decided to start their own search in town. First of all, they decided to talk to the girl's closest circle and contacted several of her friends. Among them was 17-year-old Randy Wood, the captain of the school football team, whom Heather had previously dated. Although their romantic relationship quickly ended, the young people remained friends. By the way, it was with Randy that the girl had recently run up a huge phone bill. When the mother of the missing girl called the boy, he said he had no idea about Heather's whereabouts or what could have happened to her. Despite his seemingly convincing tone, Gail felt that Randy was hiding something. He seemed to be repeating a rehearsed story, like a robot, and wasn't at all worried about the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, which seemed suspicious. However, Randy could not be caught in a lie, so Heather's mother decided to contact another friend of her daughter, another 17-year-old high school student named Josh Bagwell, whom she had recently started dating. When the woman called Josh, his grandmother picked up the phone. She said that the boy was resting after a party and she didn't want to wake him up. The elderly woman categorically refused to call her grandson to the phone and admitted that she was just cleaning up the trailer in the yard where the schoolchildren had been partying the night before. When Gail asked about Heather, the grandmother replied that she hadn't seen the girl. Having received no useful information, the worried parents drove all over the county in search of at least some clues about their daughter's whereabouts. A day passed, but all efforts were in vain, so Gail and Dwayne went to the police station again. This time, law enforcement finally joined the search operation. A week passed, but no valuable information about the missing schoolgirl appeared. Given the time frame, hope of finding the girl alive was fading with each passing day. Later, while examining the outskirts on the border with Texas, police patrols noticed a body in the river, floating face down. It was half submerged in the muddy water, but people on the bridge noticed it. The skin of the unknown victim was covered with a thick layer of dirt, as if intentionally to make the body harder to see. When divers managed to pull the gruesome find ashore, something much more terrifying was revealed under the layer of mud. The mutilated victim had numerous traces of buckshot, indicating a point-blank shooting, probably from a shotgun. The face was so disfigured that it seemed impossible to identify the deceased at first glance. A forensic examination was needed. As a result of the investigation, experts established that the victim had been shot 9 times from close range, once in the back of the head and 8 times in the back. The body was literally torn to pieces and was in a terrible condition. Since only one person was listed as missing in the area at that time, Heather Rich's parents were called in for identification. They were able to identify their daughter only by the engraved name ring given to the girl by her mother. This dispelled any doubts. It was Heather lying on the morgue table. The identity of the deceased was finally confirmed by dental records, as forensic experts found non-removable braces in the oral cavity of the mutilated body, which the schoolgirl wore to correct her bite. The news of the young cheerleader's death spread like wildfire through the town and became the main topic of discussion the very next day. Within a few hours, all the local residents knew about the tragedy. Football player Randy Wood also found out about it, for whom the day when it all happened coincided with the annual match where he had been recognized as the king of the game for several seasons in a row. Usually, after such competitions, loud celebrations were held. But this time there was no room for fun. The boy was shocked by the terrible news about his ex-girlfriend and later went to the same bridge where the body was found. He stared into the murky waters for a long time, hiding a terrible secret from everyone. In fact, Randy knew much more than he told the parents of the deceased, and soon the investigation led the police to the boy and several of his friends. These events resembled the plot of a terrifying Hollywood horror movie. In the very heart of a small town in Oklahoma, 3 teenagers turned an ordinary evening into a bloody massacre. One of them was from a wealthy family, the second was a star of school football and the team captain, and the third was a novice street hooligan. As soon as the detectives took up the investigation, they first spoke with Heather's parents. By that time, Gail had already managed to call quite a few of her daughter's friends and acquaintances. Her suspicions fell on 2 young men, Heather's ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old Randy Wood, and her current boyfriend Josh Bagwell, who had arrived from a party and didn't even bother to call. The woman was convinced that the boys were hiding something. It seemed that the high school students were telling the same rehearsed story, with even the wording of sentences coinciding in places. However, they could not give a clear answer to additional questions, which seemed extremely strange. Noticeably nervous, the teenagers were reluctant to make contact, unlike Heather's other friends who actively joined in her search. Gail intuitively felt that Randy and Josh knew much more than they were saying in their telephone excuses. Talking to classmates and other friends of the deceased, investigators received several leads indicating that Josh and Randy had information about the events of that fateful night when the girl ran away from home after an argument with her mother. Later, it turned out that Heather had indeed intended to go to a party to meet her boyfriend Josh. Despite her parents' ban on leaving the house late in the evening, this did not stop the rebellious schoolgirl. After waiting for Gail and Dwayne to fall asleep, she jumped out the window around 11 p.m. There, those same two suspicious young men, well known in the city and popular among local youth, were supposed to be waiting for her. Josh was considered a rich heir to wealthy parents. He always drove the coolest cars and wore the most stylish clothes, willingly demonstrating his family's wealth. This boy was a typical representative of the golden youth, who cared only about his own popularity and money. In contrast, Randy Wood came from a simple family, but thanks to his talent and perseverance in sports, he gained no less fame than his wealthy friend. Friends adored the handsome team captain for his virtuoso play on the field. For his merits, he became the best football player not only in the school but in the whole city, and even gained popularity among school teams at the state level. Randy and Josh were inseparable and usually spent their weekends driving around in Josh's car on dirt roads. Of course, girls could often be seen in their company. The boys regularly drank alcohol and sometimes smoked marijuana. Due to the lack of entertainment facilities for young people in the town, the teenagers simply had nothing to do, so they improvised as best they could. It is known that Heather Rich often spent time with this company. A friend said that the girl had also tried weed and alcohol with them, and on the night before her disappearance, she ran away to hang out with the popular boys. This news shocked the parents of the 16-year-old straighter student who had taken such a slippery path. Although the couple was aware of their daughter's propensity for risky experiments, they had no idea that this was happening in the company of young men. As it turned out, 5 days before the disappearance, on September 27, 1996, Heather herself and another girl from the support group were caught in a corner of the stadium. Marijuana and smoking paraphernalia were found on them. It also became known about alcohol consumption. Because of this incident, the schoolgirls were suspended from classes for 3 days. The teachers informed Gail and Dwayne about everything, and they did not hide their indignation, as they never expected their 16-year-old daughter to get involved in such dangerous experiments. Heather admitted that she tried the prohibited substances out of curiosity and promised to stop. However, the parents were more concerned about something else: why a diligent student and athlete had taken this wrong path at all. The young girl's attraction to alcohol and drugs was frightening. Despite their daughter's assurances that she would give up her bad habits, Gail and Dwayne were never able to verify her sincerity. Instead, these harmful passions probably had a direct relation to her death. The detectives decided to talk to Josh and Randy, with whom the murdered schoolgirl was last seen. They hoped to find out the details of the party that preceded Heather's disappearance. The captain of the football team admitted that he and his friend were in a trailer behind Josh's house, playing dominoes and drinking all evening. However, both boys denied any contact with Heather that ill-fated evening. Interestingly, the police noticed the same details that had alarmed the mother of the deceased. Both young men told exactly the same story, as if reciting a memorized text, and spoke mechanically, like robots. Moreover, they showed practically no emotion, even though it was about the death of their mutual friend. Such behavior convinced law enforcement officers that the teenagers were lying. They suspected that the murder could have happened out of jealousy when the young men couldn't share the girl between them. Of course, at that point, the investigators did not yet have strong evidence that would directly link the high school students to the crime. However, the strange behavior of Randy and Josh reinforced the police's doubts about their possible involvement. Both ended up as the main suspect, so it was necessary to study their biographies, relationships with Heather, and the circumstances of the party that took place on the eve of her disappearance more carefully. The autopsy results provided new food for thought. First of all, attention was drawn to the number of shots, as many as 9. Even police shotguns usually hold 8 rounds in the magazine. Why would someone reload the weapon to fire an additional shot when the victim was obviously already dead? Another interesting detail was the type of ammunition used, the so-called double buckshot. These powerful cartridges have excessive lethal force for executing a 16-year-old girl. Fortunately, such a specific choice by the criminal helped the investigation make its first serious breakthrough. These rare rounds were sold in only one store in the city. After checking the receipts, the police found out that only one person had purchased them shortly before the murder. The seller recognized in the photo the very suspected young man high school student Josh Bagwell, who had come to the store and bought a whole box, that is, 20 rounds. According to the store employee, another young man was with Josh, but not his best friend Randy, but a certain Curtis Gamble, a guy well known to the local police. As it turned out, Curtis was the oldest among those involved in the case. He was already 19. Despite his young age, he had already been arrested several times and had spent most of his conscious life in juvenile detention centers. This guy was completely inadequate and had repeatedly come to the attention of law enforcement. He was caught drunk driving, shooting his gun at dogs, horses, or even random passers-by. Therefore, Curtis himself fell under the greatest suspicion, unlike the other two young men who, although they behaved strangely, had never had problems with the law before and had never been considered aggressive or dangerous. On October 23rd, the police visited the home of the juvenile offender in a neighboring town where he lived. But even more important was the fact that just a few kilometers from his home was the same bridge under which the fishermen stumbled upon the mutilated body. Curtis himself was not found at home, but the law enforcement officers spoke with his grandmother. The woman told about her grandson and, among other things, mentioned that he knew the area well and often visited the bridge in question. Curtis had loved to fish there since he was a kid, and the elderly woman had taken him with her more than once. So it turned out that the boy had a much closer connection with the crime scene than the police could have assumed before talking to his grandmother. The next day, the detectives managed to meet with Curtis himself. The young man was detained and taken to the sheriff's office in Waurika. The interrogation lasted more than 8 hours, but the suspect essentially did not say anything, although he agreed to take a polygraph test. But even this did not become the main find of the investigators. Curtis's most valuable confession concerned his possession of a rather rare type of firearm, a Mossberg shotgun, a special feature of which is a magazine for 9 rounds. Thus, the detectives suggested that they had stumbled upon the owner of the likely murder weapon, as Heather had been shot with that very type of gun. When the weapon was seized and a ballistic examination was assigned, experts officially confirmed that the schoolgirl had been shot with Curtis's shotgun. After being presented with evidence of his involvement in the murder of the young cheerleader, the boy gave in. He told the police that he had dragged 2 of his friends, Randy and Josh, into this crime, after which he wrote a detailed 2-page confession. 3 weeks after Heather's death, law enforcement finally had a suspect who had confessed to the crime. Given the likely complicity of the other young men, Randy and Josh were also arrested and brought to the station. The schoolboys were shown Curtis's testimony, where he claimed that he himself had initiated the massacre of the girl, but Randy had become the direct perpetrator. According to the confessor, he had given his shotgun to his friend and ordered him to shoot the innocent victim, while Josh had simply been present. However, the police were skeptical about this testimony, since the football team captain did not fit the image of a typical criminal. In the past, the young man had never had any problems with the law, had been an exemplary student and a successful athlete, popular among his peers. No one had ever spoken badly of him. Considering the geography of the events, the party took place in southern Oklahoma, and the body was found in Texas. The boys faced trial in this particular state, where the death penalty is prescribed for murder. This became a key problem for the investigation, as under local laws, the actual perpetrator could end up in the dock. Therefore, none of the suspects wanted to take the blame for the fatal shot. Only after persistent attempts by the police and a second meeting with the investigators did Randy finally begin to testify. However, he categorically denied his direct participation in the murder, claiming that Curtis had been the shooter and the initiator of the massacre of Heather, and Josh had simply helped him. For his part, Josh refused to cooperate with law enforcement. Thus, in October 1996, the detectives received 2 confessions that contradicted each other in many aspects. In the end, the investigators concluded that Randy's testimony seemed more truthful, and he had also successfully passed a lie detector test. It became clear that it would hardly be possible to establish the exact sequence of events on the fateful evening of October 2nd with 100% certainty, but it was decided to rely on the information provided by the football team captain. According to his confessions, that day Randy had planned to drink with his friends Curtis and Josh. When they gathered, it turned out that Heather was supposed to join them. The girl knew Josh and Randy himself well, but had never met Curtis before, so she had no idea how dangerous a guy he was. When all 4 of them got together and had a good drink, Heather, like the rest of the company, found herself on the verge of losing consciousness. It was at this moment that Curtis, drunk, got the idea to take advantage of the girl's helpless state and abuse her. he immediately proceeded to act. As Randy recounted, Heather woke up from the harassment and screamed, pushing the attacker away, and then fainted again. Despite the fact that she could barely move her tongue, Curtis got scared because even a half-drunk victim could remember everything when she sobered up. He knew very well that rapes are met with an unfriendly reception in prison, and he did not want to end up behind bars because of this incident. Therefore, he suggested simply getting rid of the girl. The younger boys initially took these words as a bad joke, but Curtis was not joking. He really took a shotgun out of the trunk of his car and pointed it at the three teenagers. Randy and Josh realized that they were dealing with an extremely unpredictable guy, so they decided not to argue. They loaded the helpless schoolgirl into the trunk of Josh's car, and the whole company headed towards Curtis's house. But a few kilometers from the destination, the older boy ordered them to turn to the bridge where the victim's body was later found. Curtis forced his friends to stop in the middle of the bridge, get Heather out of the trunk, and put her by the railing. Fearing for their own lives, Randy and Josh obeyed. When the unconscious girl was pulled out of the car, she could not stand on her feet. The young men laid her on the ground and sat down in the car, not imagining what would happen next. Curtis walked right up to the helpless Heather and began to shoot her. Randy saw with his own eyes how a huge hole formed in his classmate's skull. He could not stand the gruesome sight, covered his face with his hands, and was afraid to even look in that direction. The attacker emptied the entire magazine of the shotgun into the victim, after which he and Josh threw the girl's mutilated body off the bridge. Getting into the car, the boys fled the crime scene. They saw with their own eyes what Curtis had done to Heather, so fear for their own lives made them keep silent. In October 1996, the three young men were officially charged with the abduction and murder of 16-year-old Heather Ridge. The investigators had the hardest time working with Josh Bagwell, who refused to testify and against whom, in fact, there was no direct evidence of involvement. The prosecution had to rely solely on the words of the other two defendants in the case, which contradicted each other. Due to the lack of physical evidence, the evidence base was not very reliable. To remedy this situation, the prosecutor offered Randy Wood a deal with the investigation. In exchange for testimony against Josh, the young man was promised life imprisonment with the right to parole after 30 years. Randy immediately agreed. The prosecutor's office also discussed with Heather's parents the possibility of a similar sentence for Curtis. In the opinion of the victim's family, the most important thing was to get truthful testimony from him, and not to send the underage organizer of the murder to the death penalty. The Rich family first and foremost wanted to know the truth. On October 15th, Curtis accepted the prosecution's offer and pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment without the right to early release. At the same time, during the trial, he continued to behave defiantly and inadequately. While in custody awaiting trial, Curtis once attacked a guard, knocked him down, and began to strangle him. The enraged prisoner was subdued only by the joint efforts of several police officers. In February 1998, almost a year and a half after Heather's tragic death, the trial of Josh Bagwell began. The case had gained such notoriety that there were so many people eager to attend the hearing. In the end, access to the courtroom was restricted, with both random spectators and members of the press barred from being present. The defenders of the accused resorted to various attempts to justify their clients. In fact, the lawyers tried to tarnish the reputation of Heather herself, portraying her as an alcoholic and a loose woman who had allegedly entered into an intimate relationship with Curtis herself and then began to threaten him with exposure, forcing the boy to resort to drastic measures. The parents had to defend the honor and dignity of their daughter. In reality, the girl was a diligent student, a talented athlete, and an extremely decent person who simply found herself in the wrong company and encountered a real criminal. The floor was given to Curtis. To the surprise of those present, he suddenly returned to his initial version of events, claiming that Josh had not participated in the crime at all and had not even been aware of the murder plans. Instead, according to Curtis, it was Randy who had fired the fatal shot. This testimony deeply affected Randy. Unexpectedly for everyone, the football team captain took a desperate step. He refused the plea bargain. The young man did not want his confession to be regarded as dictated solely by the desire to save his own skin. Accusing his accomplices right in the courtroom, Randy stated that he primarily wanted to achieve justice for the innocently murdered girl. This decision went against even the advice of the defendant's lawyer. Despite all the nobility of this act, Randy consciously risked ending up on death row. It was this selfless behavior of the young man that made a strong impression on Heather's parents. The couple even personally met with Randy after the court session. Such a bold and principled step was of great importance to the family of the deceased. On February 10th, Wood appeared before the jury and told the whole truth about the terrible events of that fateful evening. His testimony left no doubt. The young man described in detail the full participation of Josh and Curtis in the murder of Heather, as well as Bagwell's role in concealing the traces of the crime. On February 14th, Curtis Gamble was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and the intentional commission of this particularly serious crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with an additional term of 99 years. In May 1998, a meeting took place between Heather's parents and Randy as part of a live television talk show. Despite all the pain and sorrow of losing their daughter, the rich couple expressed sincere admiration for the honesty and deep remorse of this young man. On August 7, 1998, the trial of Randy Wood was concluded. He was also found guilty of involvement in the murder. The young man was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 40 years. This decision saddened many people because Wood was the only one of the 3 defendants in the case who sincerely repented of what he had done and, risking his own life, decided to bring the truth to the jury. The prevailing opinion in society was that the boy did not deserve such a severe punishment. Josh Bagwell also suffered the fate of life imprisonment without the right to early release. He was sent to serve his sentence in the same correctional facility as Curtis. In January 2002, both convicts made a daring escape attempt, taking advantage of the night. They managed to hide in the state of Texas for 10 days. A nationwide search was announced. Eventually, the fugitives were caught and returned behind bars to continue serving their life sentences. Today, we will examine one of the most intriguing and mysterious cases I have ever investigated, which happened in Philadelphia, USA, in 2011, the case of Ellen Rae Greenberg. This case caused a lot of controversy and discrepancies among both law enforcement and the victim's family, as the cause of death remains unclear to this day. However, despite the complexity and ambiguity of this case, it undoubtedly deserves attention due to its mysteriousness and unusual nature. Ellen Greenberg was born on June 23, 1993 in New York, and was the only child of George and Sandra Greenberg. At the time of the tragic events, the girl was 27 years old and lived in Philadelphia. Ellen grew up in an atmosphere of love and care and was a cheerful and sociable girl. During her school years, she was actively involved in sports, particularly softball and golf, achieving considerable success and demonstrating remarkable competitiveness. In addition, Ellen was distinguished by her sociability and ability to find common ground with people. According to her mother, Ellen had a special gift for bringing people together around her. Ellen had an incredibly strong love for animals and willingly helped them by visiting specialized shelters for stray animals. Her mother called Ellen a white angel of kindness who wouldn't hurt a fly. After successfully graduating from high school, Ellen entered the University of Pennsylvania, where she received a diploma with high honors as a communications specialist. However, over time, she realized that this was not her true calling. Therefore, Ellen continued her studies in the evening department of the university until she obtained a teacher's diploma, and shortly after graduation, she was fortunate to get a job as a first-grade teacher in Philadelphia. Ellen loved children to death, which explained her choice of profession. The year 2008 became a fateful one for Ellen because that's when she met Samuel Goldberg, a representative of a well-known and influential local family. Romantic feelings flared up between the young people, and they were so fascinated with each other that they soon decided to live together. And already in 2011, shortly before the terrible events, the couple got engaged and planned to get married in August. Ellen was on cloud 9 with happiness and enthusiastically prepared for the wedding, trying on the dress, sending out invitations, not even suspecting what an unexpected and dramatic turn awaited her ahead. And then came that fateful day, January 20th, 2011. On that day, when Ellen was at work, a severe snowstorm began in Philadelphia, forcing schools to close early. Ellen hurried home to the apartment she rented with her fiancé Samuel. Around 5 o'clock in the evening, the man went to the gym, not suspecting that he was seeing his beloved for the last time. Approximately an hour later, at 5:45, having returned home, he was surprised to find that the door to the apartment was locked from the inside. Sam knocked several times, calling out Ellen's name, then tried to call her and even sent 9 text messages, but received no response. In despair, the man went downstairs, hoping that the building's security guard would help him break down the door. However, the guard refused, referring to the fact that he had no right to leave his post, so Sam had to act on his own. With the first blow, he managed to knock out the door. But unfortunately, inside he was met with a horrifying sight. Ellen was sitting on the kitchen floor, leaning against the cabinets, covered in numerous wounds. Without wasting a second, Sam called the rescue service 911. The dispatcher, after listening to his story, advised him to check if Ellen was breathing and, if possible, perform artificial respiration. However, as he was about to follow these instructions, the man noticed that a knife was sticking out of his fiance's chest, making it impossible to start resuscitation. And apparently, it was already too late. Ellen showed no signs of life. When the police arrived at the scene and began their inspection, it became clear that no one had broken into the apartment, as the door was locked with a latch from the inside, and there were no signs of a struggle or disorder inside. Moreover, Sam had to knock down the door, otherwise it was impossible to get inside. Accordingly, the likelihood that an intruder had entered the apartment was extremely low. The police also noted the absence of any wounds on the victim's hands that would be characteristic of self-defense. At the same time, despite the number and severity of the injuries sustained, the version that Ellen could have inflicted them on herself seemed unlikely. However, without waiting for the results of the forensic medical examination, law enforcement officers concluded that Ellen had taken her own life, although no suicide note was found at the scene to explain the motives for such an act. An interesting fact was that there was fruit on the kitchen table. Obviously, Ellen was going to make a fruit salad, and suddenly it occurred to her to take her own life? Samuel was taken to the police station to give evidence, and the girl's parents were informed of the tragic news by phone. Shocked with grief, they lived in Harrisburg, a 2-hour drive from Philadelphia. They could not believe that they had lost their only daughter, and under such circumstances. However, the very next day, the conclusion about the cause of Ellen's death changed. The autopsy revealed the presence of 20 stab wounds, 10 of which were located in the chest area in the front, and another 10 in the neck area in the back. According to the forensic expert, the nature of the injuries indicated that it was a murder, not a suicide. In addition, hematomas of varying degrees of age were found on the victim's body. It seemed incredible that Ellen could have inflicted injuries on herself in the occipital region, especially since at least 2 of the wounds to the neck were extremely deep and could have caused loss of consciousness. Inflicting such a number of wounds, especially considering the head injury, would have required extraordinary strength and endurance. And would Ellen, after all this, have been able to stab herself in the heart? Because that's exactly the position in which the knife was found. Thus, the version that Ellen could have inflicted injuries on herself in the occipital region raised serious doubts, especially considering that at least 2 wounds to the neck were so deep that they could have led to loss of consciousness. Moreover, inflicting such a number of wounds on herself, especially after a serious head injury, would have required extraordinary strength and endurance. Moreover, it is hard to believe that after 19 previous injuries, Ellen would have been able to stab herself in the heart. Would it have been possible to do this alone? However, despite all these arguments, the police rejected the coroner's version of murder, although it seemed the most likely to Ellen's family and loved ones. Instead, the authorities insisted that Ellen had taken her own life. Investigators justified their position by the absence of any signs of the presence of outsiders at the scene, doors locked from the inside, and the testimony of neighbors who heard nothing suspicious except for Sam's shouting for Ellen through the closed door. Moreover, the DNA analysis taken from the knife revealed only the prints of the deceased herself. As for the bruises on the body, the police explained their appearance by the girl's participation in contact sports, although in recent years she had not been engaged in any sports activities at all. On the other hand, law enforcement also studied Ellen's psychological state on the eve of the tragedy and learned from her parents that during this period she was struggling with anxiety and was even taking 2 different medications, both of which could cause side effects in the form of life-threatening thoughts and behaviors. However, the psychiatrist Ellen consulted assured that she did not notice any signs of suicidal tendencies in her. And during the last session that took place 2 weeks before the fatal events, Ellen seemed quite happy and satisfied with life. The doctor also noted that the patient never mentioned being subjected to any cruel treatment by anyone, which was confirmed by her parents, who characterized their daughter as a sensitive, cheerful, and positively minded person. In fact, no one from her inner circle could believe that Ellen was capable of causing herself such terrible injuries. After all, she was in anticipation of a happy future, actively preparing for the wedding, trying on the dress, and sending out invitations literally a few days before the tragedy. And although the girl's mother and friends admitted that lately she had been experiencing some anxiety and stress related to work and wedding preparations, there was nothing extraordinary about it. The mere thought that Ellen could have decided to commit suicide on the eve of her own wedding absolutely did not correspond to her character and worldview. Given the stark contradictions between the forensic expert's conclusion about a violent death and the police's position insisting on suicide, the doctor decided to send a sample of the deceased's spinal cord tissue for additional examination to a neuropathologist from the Bureau of Forensic Medicine, hoping to establish the truth in this way. The fact is that if at least one of the deep wounds to the neck had damaged the spinal cord, it would inevitably have led to paralysis and deprived the victim of the ability to inflict further injuries on herself. Therefore, the presence of 20 wounds of varying severity on the body indicated the involvement of another person in the crime. However, 3 months later, the forensic expert suddenly abandoned his initial version of murder, stating that the incised wounds on the neck were not serious enough to cause paralysis, and accordingly could well have been inflicted by Ellen herself. The girl's parents never received a clear explanation for the reasons behind such a radical change in the expert's position. They could not believe that their daughter, who was so vulnerable and sensitive to pain that she did not even dare to pierce her ears a second time, suddenly turned out to be capable of such a desperate and cruel act. The most shocking and outrageous thing for the family was the authorities' announcement about the final closure of the case, contrary to all arguments and evidence. However, Ellen's relatives were not going to give up and decided to start their own investigation, even despite the significant financial costs that it required. They involved leading experts in the field of forensic medicine and criminology, such as Kirill Klein and Henry Lee, who questioned the official coroner's report on suicide. By the way, the forensic expert himself admitted back in 2012 that the probability of the girl's violent death was quite high. The authoritative forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht also noted that, according to statistics, women rarely use sharp objects for suicide and usually do not inflict wounds on themselves through clothing. In addition, an experienced detective and criminalist named Brennan, who offered his services to the Greenberg family free of charge, studied the photos and video materials from the scene and discovered that the nature of the blood traces did not correspond to the position of Ellen's body, who was allegedly sitting leaning against the kitchen cabinets. Instead, a horizontal strip of clotted blood was noticed on the wall, which contradicted the laws of gravity, and blood splatters on the victim's boots indicated that at the time of receiving the injuries, she was in an upright position. All these facts led the detective to think that the original setting at the scene of the tragedy had been changed, and the girl's body had been moved. Despite the persistent efforts of the victim's family, their lawyer failed to achieve a revision of the official version of the investigation, since this required more substantial evidence. It seemed that the case had reached a dead end and was doomed to oblivion. However, in 2015, Andrea, an assistant district attorney in the Homicide Investigation Department, became interested in it. His attention was drawn to the strange circumstances of the event, and he decided to carefully study all the available evidence, trying to understand what could really have pushed the young woman to such a desperate step. As it became known from the testimony of Ellen's fiancé, on the day of the tragedy, the apartment door was locked from the inside, so he had to break it down to get inside. However, analyzing the photos from the scene, Andrea noticed that the lock was an ordinary hotel-type latch that could be closed not only from inside the room, but also from the outside, simply by turning the screw. Moreover, as one of the experts noted, this type of lock cannot be opened by simply kicking the door with your foot without damaging the door frame. The only damage found on the door was the absence of a screw. The police also emphasized the fact that no wounds were found on Ellen's body that would indicate self-defense. Because of this, it was impossible to establish the exact sequence of injuries. but it can be said with certainty that the last blow was directed at the heart, where the knife remained. Although, if one of the neck injuries had damaged the spinal cord, the victim would have had no chance to resist, right? Andrea's attention was also drawn to the wound on Ellen's head, the nature of which indicated that she was likely attacked from behind. So the assistant prosecutor decided to clarify this point with the forensic expert. He was informed that the neuropathologist who examined the spine did not find any damage. Andrea asked for an official conclusion that would confirm the absence of spinal injuries. But to his surprise, it turned out that such a document simply does not exist. It had disappeared somewhere. It turns out that this information was nothing more than a rumor that no one had actually seen. Moreover, it turned out that at the time of these events, there was no staff neuropathologist at the Bureau of Forensic Medicine at all. Therefore, they had to invite Dr. Adams, who supposedly examined the spine and confirmed the absence of any damage. But later it became known that no records of instructing this doctor to conduct an examination had been preserved. In a 2018 interview, when asked about this case, Dr. Adams admitted that she did not remember ever examining Ellen's spine. After all, such a unique case could hardly have faded from memory. In fact, it turned out that Dr. Adams had never conducted this examination. Having learned about this, Andrea contacted the private detective hired by the Greenberg family and advised them to invite an independent neuropathologist. The reason for this was that the assistant prosecutor found out that a sample of Ellen's spine was still stored in the Bureau of Forensic Medicine, which seemed extremely suspicious to him, because there were no good reasons for this. The family followed the advice and hired Dr. Ross. His conclusion fundamentally contradicted the probable official reports. According to the expert's conclusion, the girl's spinal cord was damaged, that is, pierced by 2 deep wounds on the neck. Under such circumstances, Ellen would not have been physically able to inflict further injuries on herself. At the same time, Andrea realized that all the data used by the police were provided by Sam, the victim's fiancé, who was at the scene, and this was the only person who saw what really happened in that apartment. According to Samuel, he left Ellen alone for about 45 minutes, and when he returned, the doors were locked from the inside. The neighbors confirmed that they heard the man calling the bride's name through the closed door. Then, according to his own testimony, seized with anxiety, he began to call the girl and then sent her 9 text messages. Having received no answer, Sam went downstairs to the building's security guard to ask if he had any tools to open the door, but he refused. Later in his explanations, Samuel noted that he went to the concierge several times, trying to persuade him to help break down the door. However, in his official testimony to the police, the man claimed that the guard was supposedly next to him when he kicked down the door and entered the apartment. This information was refuted by the concierge himself, assuring both law enforcement officers and Ellen's relatives that he was at his post the whole time and definitely did not accompany Sam during his entry into the apartment. The guard also noted another interesting detail: Samuel, who allegedly returned from the gym, was wearing shoes, not sneakers. In addition, Andrea was alarmed by the fact that the man did not immediately call 911, but first decided to break into the apartment, although it would seem that if you are really worried about a loved one and suspect that something has happened to them, the first reaction should be to call the emergency services. After listening to the recording of Sam's conversation with the 911 dispatcher, the assistant prosecutor noted a surprisingly calm tone of his voice for such an extreme situation.
Help! I need everything now. I just walked to my apartment. My fiance's on the floor with blood everywhere.
What is the address?
4601 Flat Rock Road. Please come. Help! Now!
4601
Flat Rock Road.
Is this a house or apartment?
Oh no! Oh no! It's an apartment.
What apartment number?
Please hurry, please.
Where is she bleeding from?
I don't know. I can't tell.
No. So you have to calm yourself down in order to get you some help.
I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm looking at her right now. I can't see anything. There's nothing broken. She's bleeding. Ellie!
You don't know where she's bleeding from? Can't tell where the blood's coming from?
I think her head. I think she hit her head, But it's everywhere.
Okay,
it's everywhere.
She might have fallen. Do you know what happened?
She may have slipped. There's blood on the table. Her face is a little purple.
Okay, hold on for rescue for her. Stay on the phone. Philadelphia Fire Department 842. What's the address? No,
4601 Flat Rock Road. Please hurry.
4601 Flat Rock.
Yes.
What's wrong?
I went downstairs to go work out. I came back up. The door was latched. My fiance's inside. She wasn't answering. So after about a half hour, I decided to break it down. I see her now, just on the floor with blood. She's not responding.
Okay, is she breathing? Look at her chest. I need you to calm down, and I need you to look at her chest. It's really.
I really don't think she is.
Listen to me. Someone's on the way. Look at her chest. Is she flat on her back?
She's on her back. So I bring her.
Look at her chest and tell me if it's going up and down, up and down.
I don't see her moving.
Okay, do you know how to do CPR?
I don't.
Okay, I can tell you what to do, okay, until they get there. I want you to keep her flat on her.
God.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, okay.
Are you willing to do CPR with me over the phone until they get there?
I have to, right?
Okay, so get her flat on her back, bare her chest, okay? You want to rip her shirt off. Okay? You need to kneel down by her side.
Oh, my God. Allie, please.
Listen, you can't freak out, sir, because you
Okay, I'm trying not to. Her shirt won't come off. It's a zipper. Oh, my God. She stabbed herself.
Where?
She fell with a knife. Oh, no, her knife's sticking out.
There was no despair or shock in his intonations. Moreover, when the rescue service operator asked him to describe what had happened, Samuel ignored this request and continued to talk about how he went to the gym and then returned home. Another interesting fact that the Greenberg family's lawyer drew attention to was the probable movement of the body after death. This was evidenced by the characteristic traces of bruises on the skin, which could have been formed as a result of dragging the victim across the floor. In addition, this version was also supported by the remains of blood on the floor, indicating that Ellen had been lying in a different place for some time. And when the 911 dispatcher began instructing Samuel on how to provide first aid and conduct cardiopulmonary resuscitation, a completely inappropriate question was heard in response whether he really needed to do this. Then, supposedly for 2 or 3 minutes, the man tried to carry out resuscitation measures, after which he suddenly informed the operator that he had just noticed a knife sticking out of Ellen's chest. That is, all this time he was next to the body, but for some reason did not see the instrument of the crime. And importantly, it was not some inconspicuous object, but a huge butcher knife about 10 inches long, which was practically impossible not to notice. However, despite this, after discovering the knife, Samuel for some reason suggested that his fiancée had probably accidentally fallen on the blade. Strange, isn't it? Samuel was taken to the police station to give testimony, but he agreed to do so only in the presence of his lawyer, and limited himself to an extremely laconic statement. After that, the man never spoke to the investigators again, despite repeated attempts by law enforcement officers to interrogate him, especially after information emerged that Ellen had allegedly inflicted fatal wounds on herself. It was clear that it was no longer possible to force Samuel to testify. All these circumstances only strengthened the conviction of the victim's family that the girl had been deprived of life. In 2016, a neuropathologist working on behalf of the Greenberg family discovered signs of strangulation and hemorrhages, in addition to perforation of the spinal cord. On the other hand, many experts who viewed the video footage from the crime scene were extremely surprised by the minuscule amount of blood, given the victim's 20 stab wounds. This led to suspicion that the room had been thoroughly cleaned. However, for some reason, the investigation never resorted to the use of luminol, a substance critical for detecting blood traces in such cases. The police did not even bother to examine the trash can after inspecting the crime scene. All they did was come, take a cursory look around, assume that Ellen had committed suicide, and didn't even post a guard to ensure the inviolability of the apartment's environment. Moreover, as it turned out, the very next day after the tragic events, Sam's uncles and cousins appeared in the apartment allegedly for his suit. However, they left the crime scene not only with clothes, but also with the laptops of both Sam and Ellen, and also took the girl's mobile phone. And only on January 29th, that is, 3 days later, all these items were officially seized by police officers. An examination of the laptop showed that they had been used to search for information on how to end one's life. However, the official report dated April 2011 did not mention these allegedly discovered facts. Moreover, Andrea did not find a single document in the district attorney's files that would contain the results of a computer forensic examination. Again, there was a phantom, non-existent analysis. Given all these circumstances, the views of Ellen's parents and friends on her psychological state on the eve of the tragedy, as well as on Samuel's reputation, changed somewhat. And although they never directly called him a suspect or a likely perpetrator, certain doubts still crept in. Upon reflection, the girl's relatives and friends admitted that they had indeed noticed changes in her behavior a few weeks before the fatal incident, but did not attach much importance to it at the time. Ellen's girlfriends recalled that lately, she had begun to consult with Samuel about every decision she made, which had not been observed before. If previously Ellen demonstrated complete independence, then on the eve of the tragedy, she turned from a cheerful and carefree person into a restless and anxious one. Ellen even once confessed to her parents that she wanted to quit her job and return home to them. However, she emphasized that Samuel had nothing to do with it, and that everything was fine in their relationship. Ellen's parents assured their daughter that they were always happy to see her at home and were ready to support her if needed. And they advised her to seek help regarding her anxiety problems. In 2019, the Deputy Coroner and Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences, Gregory McDonald's, released a report confirming the police version. He claimed that Ellen had inflicted the superficial wounds on herself. Because if a person decides to take their own life in this way, they usually start with shallow cuts, as if testing their determination and pain threshold. And then, in the process, they inflict more and more serious injuries on themselves. But on the other hand, the nature of the deep wounds and other traces that could indicate an attack still seemed suspicious to the expert. Samuel maintained contact with the family of his late fiancée for a year after the tragedy. But then his calls and visits became less and less frequent, and soon he completely broke off communication, sending the Greenbergs an email with a message about his own wedding. Currently, this man is still married, has 2 children, and leads a completely normal, ordinary life, absolutely detached from the exhausting struggle that Ellen's family continues, trying to figure out why justice neglected their grief and did not help establish the truth. The girl's parents, together with a lawyer, filed a lawsuit against the experts who performed the autopsy, against the Bureau of Forensic Medicine, the county administration, and the city of Philadelphia. They demanded a review of the case and a change in the wording of the cause of death, due to which the investigation was prematurely closed. And only in May 2020, the first ray of hope appeared. The Philadelphia court granted the Greenbergs' claim. In this regard, the family hopes to gain access to all the materials of the criminal proceedings, which they have been denied so far. In addition, there is a video recording from surveillance cameras in the building, which allegedly does not show anything suspicious. It only records the time when Sam left the apartment and returned. A request was also made to obtain an audio recording of conversations with 911 dispatchers. However, due to the pandemic, all these procedures had to be postponed, and the exact date of the court hearing, tentatively scheduled for 2021, has not yet been determined. If the court does establish that Ellen's death was violent, the case will be reclassified as murder and the investigation will resume. Although given the many lost opportunities and miscalculations at the initial stage of the investigation, many important pieces of evidence have unfortunately been lost forever, such as the luminol examination, which was never carried out, which is very, very strange. Ellen's parents created a special Facebook page called Justice for Ellen, where they inform the public about the progress of the case. But most importantly, they do not let people forget about the tragic fate of their daughter. They sincerely believe that sooner or later the truth will prevail. As of today, the situation looks like this. In July 2022, the Attorney General's Office of the State of Pennsylvania closed the case, officially acknowledging the existence of a conflict of interest. Today, the Ellen Greenberg case has been transferred to the Chester County Prosecutor's Office, where a new group of investigators and a prosecutor have been appointed to re-examine the case files. This news became a long-awaited ray of hope for the parents of the deceased girl, who all this time insisted that their daughter could not have voluntarily taken her own life. However, friends, relatives of Ellen, and even outsiders who have become familiar with the details of this confusing story continue to consider it extremely suspicious and unusual. Most of them have no trust in the official police version. There are too many blind spots and understatements in this case. After all, quite often, violence in couples flares up precisely after the engagement when the bride and groom are preparing for the wedding. It is quite possible that when faced with cruel treatment and beatings by her fiancé after the proposal, Ellen was at a loss and could not clearly formulate and voice this problem. Perhaps that is why she did not dare to tell her parents or therapist about her suffering. It's worth imagining here you are in a 3-year relationship with a person you thought you knew well. Suddenly, your partner unexpectedly changes, reveals their true essence, and resorts to violence against you. It is possible that Ellen deluded herself that this stressful situation would soon pass. Everything would be settled and life would return to its usual course. But unfortunately for this bride and future wife, everything ended in the most tragic way. In fact, even a cursory analysis of the circumstances of the event indicates obvious signs of murder, and a murder that is deliberately hushed up. Because how is it possible to inflict such severe and numerous injuries on oneself alone? It seems absolutely unreal. First, Ellen would not have been able to continue inflicting blows on herself after deep damage to the spinal cord. And we are not talking about some scratches, but about extremely serious wounds. After such injuries, paralysis usually occurs, and a person loses the ability to move, let alone the ability to inflict further blows on themselves. And this is without taking into account the wound on the back of the head, the depth of which reached 6 centimeters. It is quite likely that this particular blow was fatal. So how, for heaven's sake, did the investigators manage to qualify this case as suicide? It's just beyond common sense. Characteristic signs of strangulation on the victim's neck were also present. In general, the location of all the wounds unequivocally indicates that the attacker was behind Ellen. In addition, Samuel's cautious behavior seems extremely suspicious. Is it possible that a man who had just discovered the mutilated body of his beloved a few minutes ago was able to instantly come to his senses so much as to call a lawyer and then give extremely laconic and evasive testimony without going into details? No, I will never believe it. In such a terrible and stressful situation, any normal person would be in a state of deep shock and affect. It is unlikely that anyone would be capable of such careful, thought-out, and logical actions. And there's no need to talk about the obvious negligence, and even indifference on the part of the investigation and forensic experts. All potentially important evidence was ignored. Key examinations were not assigned and not carried out. How inept and incompetent do you have to be to not notice in this case numerous signs of violent deprivation of life and mindlessly approve the version of suicide? And you know, why did this happen? Let me express my own assumption because in fact, all this was planned, like a carefully thought out scenario. The only thing that does not fit in the head is who you need to be and what connections you need to have in order to hide such a number of indisputable evidence of a crime. Are there grounds for seeing a corruption component in this case? Undoubtedly. Was all this deliberately staged? I have no doubt. Of course, you can condemn me for such conclusions, but excuse me, my imagination simply refuses to draw a picture where a person inflicts more than 20 knife blows on themselves, having strangled themselves before that, and then crawls to the sink in the bathroom. And why do I tend to think that it was Sam who was involved in Ellen's death, and not anyone else? I'll explain. Firstly, he was the last one to leave the apartment before the body was discovered. Secondly, he was the only one who had an obvious motive for killing the girl, possibly in connection with a parallel affair on the side. Thirdly, his behavior after the tragedy was at least strange. He remained impassive and calm, and a year later, as if nothing had happened, he married another woman. Usually people who have experienced such a terrible loss withdraw for at least 3 years, and only then gradually return to normal life.